Norman Lamb to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on getting through that catching description for this debate. And I'd like to start by thanking, on behalf of the all-party group for Valporate and other anti-epileptic drugs in pregnancy, the Backbench Business Committee for facilitating this debate. And I would also incidentally like to pay tribute to Janet Williams and Emma Murphy, who are present today, who have fought tirelessly on this cause over very many years, and we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's fair to say that scandal is an overused word in political discourse, but I think the word appropriately relates to this issue. If you're a family who have suffered as a result of the mother taking Valporate in pregnancy, you would regard this as an absolute scandal, and I think we need to treat it in that way. In many ways, it has similarities to the thalidomide scandal. A whole group of women over very many years taking a drug during pregnancy without knowing of the risks involved, and really quite awful consequences, which I will come to a little later. And we owe them a duty. That's the really important point, I think, to get across. Now, Valporate was licensed for... I will.
To him. I apologise that I can't stay for the whole debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I too want to pay tribute to Janet and Emma and the campaign that they've run, and this great debate is a great tribute to their efforts. Would you agree that the real scandal is that we have known since the 1960s about the problems with this drug, but as the Right Honourable Gentleman says, mothers were not told, expectant women were not told, despite the fact that the government and the pharmaceutical industry knew that there were dangers?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I completely agree with her. Interestingly, the original product licence in March 1974 states, so this is way back then, in women of childbearing age, it should only be used in severe cases or those resistant to other treatments. So they knew in the 70s, and yet the appalling scandal is that so many women since then have had their lives completely turned upside down, with enormous consequences for the children born, because they weren't told.
Give way on that?
I will.
So I'm really grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. My constituent Nicola, who took sodium valproate through her pregnancy, her son has chronic fatigue. The impact on her family is immense and expensive. We have fought and managed to secure medical support for her through hospitals in Manchester. Would you agree with me that there needs to be some government fund to make sure people who are victims of this have that support and are not relying upon their own means?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I completely agree. I will be coming on to make that case a little later on, but it seems to me to be unanswerable, and I think the government needs to reflect on that. But it was worse than just a sort of neglect of not telling women. From the minutes of the Subcommittee on Adverse Reactions, this is the subcommittee of the Committee on Safety of Medicines, in the minutes from 18th of July 1973, this document has been uncovered, and it reveals a real outrage, because it talks about keeping it from women, keeping the information, deliberately withholding it, especially, it says, as it could give rise to fruitless anxiety. And it says, nevertheless, they thought it would be best if prescribers were all made aware of the nature of the evidence and recommended that a statement similar to that proposed by ICI in respect of another product could be included in all relevant data sheets, but not on package inserts, so that there would be no danger of patients themselves seeing it. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. I give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable member for giving way on that point, and indeed on that very document. Would he share with me great disappointment if the original documents should go missing from the archive while these debates and this campaign is ongoing?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention, and I mean, issues like this are of enormous concern, and it does raise the question as to whether there needs to be some sort of inquiry or a Hillsborough-style panel to look at exactly how this has happened. But I also think it's really important that we focus on the top priority, which is ensuring that women get told, that it's not used inappropriately, and that there is a compensation package of some sort.
On that point,
I will.
Isn't it even more extraordinary, given what he said, that even now, this information and these warnings are not getting through effectively to pregnant women and their families? My constituent David Tout's own son has been affected by this. 20,000 children across the country in every single one of our constituencies. There's no sense of urgency from the MHRA or from the government.
Absolutely.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that, or the right honourable gentleman, and I think he's absolutely right. That's how I feel about this. There's the sort of sense of inertia. For goodness sake, for as long as women are not getting told, there are more babies being born. This is the awful horror of this.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way, but I think many of us have been approached by constituents or groups in this House about several of these kind of drug scandals that in actual fact represent a very paternalistic time when the patient was not part of a team in an open discussion with the doctor. And I'm sure that there are many of these that they should be looked at together, because the principles of all of them are the same.
Well, I think that's a very sort of profound comment to make, and it does reflect, I think, a changing attitude and culture, that it's thankfully now less paternalistic than it was, but there are still elements of that remain and that we need to keep fighting against. But I think she makes a good point that it relates to other products as well. Now, over the years since then, Madam, I'll take this and then I ought to make some progress.
Thank you. Is he aware of the research done by the Independent Fetal Anti-Convulsant Trust, in fact, and they found that up to 400 babies have been born affected by Valporate since the toolkit was launched in February 2016?
Well, again, I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and I am aware of that figure. And again, it's shocking that it just makes the point that this is a continuing scandal. It's not something from the dim and distant past. It continues today. Now, through the period since the 70s, Madam Deputy Speaker, bit by bit more information has emerged. In 2000, the information given to patients was changed to refer to the warning, but it took until then for anything to emerge. And then in 2005, Zanofi added, and it's an interesting question, did this downplay the risk? And it's one of the points that I think raises the question as to whether there needs to be some sort of panel investigation of this. Because in 2005, Zanofi said on their warnings to patients, some babies born to mothers who took Epilin during pregnancy may develop less quickly than normal and may require additional educational support. Well, that's putting it at its mildest, because actually the implications were far more serious than that. And the question is, did they know then? So these things, I think, need to be investigated further. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important to just address the question of what the risks actually are. Well, amongst the general population, there is a risk of fetal abnormality of 2 to 3%. But if valproate is taken during pregnancy, that goes up to 11%. And the defects include spina bifida, malformations of the face, including cleft palate, the skull, limbs, organs, including heart, and respiratory issues. Also, and I think this is incredibly important not to disregard this, 30 to 40% of people taking valproate during pregnancy, there is a 34 to 40% risk of developmental problems. And these can include life-changing issues, poor speech and language skills, delayed walking, talking, behavioural problems, interaction, communication issues, low intellectual abilities. The consequences of this is incalculable. Memory problems, noise sensitivity, sensory issues, ADHD, it's already been mentioned, autism spectrum disorders. And it's estimated that about 20,000 babies have been affected by this since the 1970s. And this is another important point. It has had a profound impact on the mothers themselves, who too often have been treated as if they are to blame for the problems that their children face, and who then face years of guilt. And this is the really shameful aspect of this. And I wanted to just turn to some case studies. Becky Parish, a mother from my own county of Norfolk, she says that Logan is 7 and was born with a 7mm unilateral cleft lip and palate, which the geneticist confirmed was due to fetal valproate syndrome. He also has grommets and struggled with glue ear and bronchitis as a baby, has needed constant speech therapy, suffers ear infections. He has all facial features of FVS and is short in height and low in weight for his age. He has severe aggressional and destructive behaviours, including violence against others and self-injurious behaviours, and so it goes on. This is really significant. There's a danger, I think, sometimes when we talk about, in general terms, abstract terms, but when you actually hear the stories of families affected, you realise just how awful it is. In her case, she says, social services blamed me for it. This is the assertion that social services, in her case, thought that the problems related to an attachment disorder, with the implication that the mother was in some way to blame. Social blamed me for it, and so did the school. And now I feel more guilt due to it being FVS, because no matter how much someone says I didn't know and it wasn't my fault, the guilt never goes away, and sadly it never will. This is really shocking. She decided not to continue with valproate when she became pregnant with her youngest child, who's now 5. And she says that this was not a difficult decision. Her child's health was, in her view, far more important than her own seizures, a terribly difficult judgment for her to make. But she stopped straight away, and she was not put on any alternative treatment, despite conflicting messages from health professionals. Her specialist nurse, wait for it, told her that she was being selfish and made her upset at her 12-week scan. However, her neurologist said that coming off the drug was the best thing she ever had. So 2 completely conflicting messages. Carolyn Allen in Southampton talks about how her son requires support for a number of effects of this condition, including deafness of his left ear, noise sensitivity, speech and language delay. And she says he has been referred to Portage, speech therapy, occupational therapy, ophthalmic, hearing clinic, physiotherapy, community paediatricians, and has already had 1 operation to release his tongue tie. Just imagine the massive impact on this family of this condition. Paula Hartshorn, a mother from Leeds, says the powers that be need to think about the devastating impact this has on families and how these families have to just cope and instantly know how to deal with all these complex medical issues. We have been left to give up on our jobs, our careers, social interactions and everything that goes with a well-rounded life. There are no breaks for us. And these stories, just in my view, are heartbreaking. Mazzy Southam from Blackpool tells a story of not finding out until her daughter was nearly 20, when she actually managed to meet Janet and Emma and started a voyage of discovery after she'd been diagnosed with learning disabilities, dyspraxia, social anxiety disorder. She had to fight to get a geneticist to actually give advice and to investigate it, and who eventually confirmed that she has fetal valproate syndrome. A shocking fight to get justice in that case, which she shouldn't have had to go through. And she says, to me, she's an angel, and I wouldn't change her for the world. She said to me not long ago, I wouldn't want to be normal. I like my mad head. But it hurts me to say she doesn't and won't know any different, all down to the pills I took for my seizures. Just imagine living with that throughout your life. And the Minister really needs to reflect that it seems to me the government has an obligation, a duty to these people to do good by them. and not to just say that they have to resort to the local authority or to the CCG for whatever might be available in their locality. There is a moral duty here, and we have to, I think, accept it, just as we did with thalidomide. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I became aware of this scandal when I was Minister in 2013. I met with the campaigners in, I think, September of that year. I was completely horrified by what I heard. I knew nothing about it until then, and I asked the MHRA, who attended the meeting, for an urgent review of what was being done to stop more and more mothers giving birth without knowing of the risks. In October of that year, the MHRA did then ask the European Medicines Agency to undertake a full review. That review reached the conclusion, and it's very little different from what the product licence said back in 1974, that it should only be used if all other drugs are ineffective or are not tolerated. And they advocated a strengthened warning to ensure that all mothers were aware. Then in January 2015, the MHRA issued new information with stronger warnings, education materials, patient information leaflets and so on. And then eventually in February 2016, the toolkit was issued. Now, this is the toolkit. It may not look like a toolkit, but it is a toolkit. And it's of value because it gives information to clinicians and to patients about the risks involved. But again, the scandal is, and this has already been raised by those intervening, that it hasn't been communicated to very many of the women who've been affected by this. And so in September of this year, a survey carried out by the UK's 3 leading epilepsy charities, that's Epilepsy Society, Epilepsy Action and Young Epilepsy, found that these warnings are not getting through. 68% of women surveyed of childbearing age had not had any materials released to them as part of the Valporate toolkit. That's not acceptable, full stop.
The right honourable gentleman for accepting a further intervention, and he's making a very powerful case. The honourable lady mentioned earlier the paternalistic approach that the medical profession had perhaps taken in the past. Would he be as shocked as I am to learn that that paternalistic approach was still on evidence when I met the pharmaceutical company Sanofi to discuss getting information out to mothers only about 2 years ago, when they said it would be inappropriate to make that information available unsupported by very detailed advice from doctors. Of course, it's important that they should be able to discuss the matter with their clinician, but women are able to understand and interpret intelligence too.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for that intervention. I also incidentally pay tribute to her for her work on this, on the committee, the all-party committee, and her campaigning. And yes, the response she got from Sanofi 2 years ago was unacceptable. And it just, again, seeks to, or has the effect of hiding from women the full extent of this risk. Women ought to be presented with the evidence and then able to have the full discussion with the clinician about what steps to take. But the survey in September of this year also found that 18% of women did not know of the harm. Not that they hadn't received the toolkit, they still didn't know. So the system is just simply failing those women. Now, I just want to... I will give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I stand here as an advocate for my constituent, as Carol Short, who describes having her son, a 26-year-old, locked in a man's body but unable to do much more than a 10-year-old. And would he agree with me that it really is shocking with CCGs and all the funding that comes from the public sector that we still can't get this message through? But could perhaps one solution be shorter prescription times, which perhaps may mean more regularity in actually getting that advice?
Well, I agree with the point that he makes, and it's worth exploring that. There certainly need to be regular discussions, reviews of the woman's intentions about childbirth, but also the appropriateness of the treatment to that woman at that particular place and time. But that's something that should be investigated, I think, along with everything else. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to acknowledge a danger here, and it's a really important danger that needs to be properly considered. There is a risk that if all of the focus is on the risk of valproate, that women simply just give up and don't take any medication during childbirth, and that we then see a rise in unexpected deaths through epilepsy. And SUDEP Action raised this really important issue. 1,200 people die already through sudden unexpected deaths in epilepsy every year, and they estimate that about 42% of that total is avoidable. So we absolutely do not want to see any increase in that number. But for me, this just points the need for all women, indeed for all people with epilepsy, to have access to specialist teams wherever they live around the country. And my worry is that it's quite haphazard and variable what access is like around the country. Last Friday, I met with the specialist team in Norwich. It's a very, very good team, and I think and they explained to me how they've managed to reduce the use of valproate for women in childbearing years to a very, very small number. They say it's only a very small subset for whom there is no alternative. And then they can focus all of their attention on those women. But they said that that's not the case everywhere, that there's considerable variability around the country, that many women don't get access to the same specialist team. And so one of the things I would like the government to do, and the Minister to commit to, is to publish prescribing data for around the country. What is the level of the prescribing of this medication for every CCG around the country, so that we can pinpoint where overprescribing is taking place? And the interesting and rather concerning point is that if those specialists that I talked to are right, that it's only a very small subset, why is it that still, out of the 173,787 people with epilepsy taking valproate, 17,848 of those are women of childbearing age? This, to me, looks like a very substantial overprescribing, which is completely contrary to the guidance that is now being given. So if the guidance is clear that this should not be prescribed to women of childbearing age unless there is no alternative, or unless there is no alternative that is safe for that woman, why on earth are such a large number of women still being prescribed this medication? That in itself is a scandal, and the government needs to get to grips with it. And so I think the need for a holistic approach where women have access to specialist care, and where a full consideration could be given of the right arrangements for that woman, to ensure that no woman is on valproate who doesn't need to be on it during those years of childbearing age, then we might start to see an end to this awful continuing scandal. So let me move finally to the steps that I think that we need to see from the government and from others. First, the toolkit must reach everyone. It must surely be mandatory, not a voluntary act. We can't surely, given the clear evidence from the survey of how many women are not getting this, we can't just rely on the current system to work, because it is not working. 400 babies born, as the Honourable Member said, since it was introduced. So this cannot continue. The warnings must be mandatory, along with raising awareness amongst GPs, pharmacists, specialists, midwives and health visitors. Second, there should be an annual discussion with your GP or with another health professional. The Epilepsy Society has argued that this should happen. It's very much consistent with the Valporate Toolkit, which highlights the need for regular review, face-to-face discussion with a health professional before there is a renewal of the prescription. Third, there is a need for all women to have access to specialist units wherever you live around the country. We must end this haphazard variable position around the country, and we must address fully the concerns raised by SUDEP Action. Professor Ridsdale, a consultant who has specialised in this area of policy says a useful outcome of this exercise would be that whoever prescribes valproate agrees to identify and provide regular advice to women and girls at risk. Better still, that policymakers and providers start exploring how ongoing structured self-management advice might be offered to everyone with epilepsy. That's the ambition, surely, that we should set. Fourth, prescribing, we should publish the prescribing rates for valproate for every CCG across the country. The government, I know, says it has a commitment to openness. This would be a good demonstration of it, because we will be able to identify where the real problems exist, where women aren't getting access to good enough advice. Fifth, we should ensure that only those women who absolutely have to take it during those childbearing years, as the advice recommends, are the ones who take this, and that we end what appears to be a significant over-prescribing of this medication for those women. Sixth, there must be, and this comes back to some of the interventions that have been raised, including from my honourable friend, there must be a financial support package. And this, in a way, comes down to the government's duty to these people. This is something that has gone on for many decades, so this is not something that's directed at this government. But this government has the responsibility here and now to do right by these people. There is an overwhelming moral case for it, and it's not good enough for ministers to simply say that support is available locally through the local authorities or the CCGs. These families have suffered an injustice. The government has a moral obligation to address it. And if it's right for thalidomide victims, it is right for those who have lost out severely as a result of valproate. In France, a fund has been established, a €10 million fund, an initial fund. It could be added to. The government needs to take the same step in this country. Seventh, there must be a statement of regret or apology for the people who have been let down by the system so very badly. And finally, there is a case for an inquiry or for a Hillsborough-style panel to understand how on earth this outrageous scandal could ever have happened, how it has gone on for so many decades, letting down so many families across our country, and what lessons can be learned to ensure that this never ever happens again. Thank you very much.
The question